Is it okay? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I am honored and humbled to speak with you today. Thank you so much for your work, Graciela, in helping me to organize and plan this, and your work as well. I've heard you called Marie Carmen, Dr. I don't know how to pronounce your name, González-Videgaray. Thank you also for the invitation and support to be here. Thank you for letting me speak in English. I want to say that I am very comfortable hearing questions in Spanish or having conversations or comments in Spanish, and we can figure out how to make the best meaning. And I, again, thank you for letting me speak in English. Before I do my screen share with my presentation, I wanted to say that there is a lot of scholarship on the geopolitics of writing and the English language. I think many of you are going to be familiar with this, but I am happy to offer more texts if those of you that are interested. There are also continually more publications about writing studies and writing centers coming out in Spanish. And again, I'm happy to contribute. If I know of any that you are curious about, I'm happy to help find them. We have access to a lot of databases here, and I don't want to assume that there's the same access everywhere. So I'm going to share my screen. And if there's a comment in the chat that I should address or someone has a question, it's great if someone feels free to interrupt and stop and point it out. That's fine. I won't be able to see the chat when the screen is shared. I won't be able to see all of the videos. If people are waving, if something goes wrong, just interrupt, just ask questions. We can be comfortable. And let me do a screen share.
Okay, thank you.
And can you see like a full screen presentation now?
Yeah, now it's okay. Yeah, I see it.
Perfect.
All of you see it? Yeah?
I can also put the link to this in the chat if people would prefer to follow along on their own. I can also provide it at the end. If anyone wants the link, just let me know. I can put it in the chat, but sometimes it's better to just share screen and give it at the end.
Okay. Yeah, probably at the end. I think everybody is looking at the screen at the moment. Is
Okay.
that all right? ¿Todos
Yeah.
pueden ver la presentación en la pantalla?
Sí. Sin problema,
Yes,
Chelita.
Sí, sin problema.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Bueno, okay, Joe, you can continue, please.
Muy bien, let's go. The title is Giving Ourselves a Writing Chance. There is a small pun in this. There is a phrase in English called a fighting chance. I wanted to make it a little bit of a joke. I think that a fighting chance and a writing chance are a good parallel. I want to talk about collaboration, the concept of workflow, and then end with discussions of publication and how these can impact the choices we make with that. The first section, I wanted to give a sort of pedagogical writing studies overview. This part will maybe go quickly through some pieces of information. If there are interesting texts or concepts, we can spend more time in the questions at the end, but I wanted to just share some information in case it resonated with anyone. The second part, I want to talk about the concept of workflow, which is a recent text that came out that I think is really valuable for doing writing studies work. In this section, there will be time to go into breakout rooms and everyone can have a chance to speak on a question. And hopefully you find this participation is productive. We'll come back together as a group, and then we will end with some of my kind of thoughts and insights, let's say, about publication or long form writing projects.
Okay.
That is my plan for today.
Okay, thank you.
Again, thank you for having me. So, I could have had this slide up, and then we will end with questions and answers. Here are what I think could be 6 of the top best practices for writing instruction. That it is student-centered, that it is inclusive, that it is reflective, that it is perhaps creative with its assessment, with its grading or marking, that it encourages collaboration, and that it is multimodal and recognizes the multimodality of how writing is accomplished today. When I use this term student-centered, I mean a general shift from a teaching model where there is an expert in the front of the room delivering a lecture. There is still room for delivering knowledge, but I think that to learn to write, it is really beneficial to have the opportunities to practice and discuss and give feedback in a classroom setting. I think it is really important to emphasize practice over perfection. By this, I mean, if the teaching of writing is to give a perfect example and have students aspire to this in their various ways, it can sometimes be frustrating and difficult and confusing. If we can emphasize the importance of practice and give texts in process as examples and as part of the discussion, then I think it is much more productive for students. I think it is very valuable for students to see examples of successful writing at their level. Examples of students who've done excellent work, again, that does not have to be perfect or PhD publishable, but is instead a very successful version of meeting an assignment or a task. I think it is valuable to encourage students to think about doing multiple drafts and this idea of an ongoing process as part of a teaching pedagogy. And I think it is very valuable to try to encourage forms of peer feedback. This allows students to discuss with their peers. It also builds a vocabulary for talking about writing that can sometimes be missing as we're trying to think about these concepts, but articulating them to even ourselves, we can help build the language collaboratively. There are more ways we can think about student-centered pedagogy, but we'll move on for now. This one's a little busier. I also think that teaching of writing should be inclusive. Now, here in the composition discipline in the United States, it is not a new idea to attend to different language backgrounds or learning abilities or styles. We have been grappling with these different student demographics for a while. What is sort of newer is to be sure that we are assigning material that is relevant to students, even if it is contemporary or digital. We are also trying to offer multiple prompts where students can choose on the topic they will write, and that these topics are perhaps giving different degrees of difficulty. That encourages agency from different backgrounds or learning needs. And also offering these multiple formats and questioning what we count as an official text. So that means tweets are discussed in class, that means blog posts, that means YouTube videos. These can count as texts because they will be relevant to students and can be considered as such. We also, I'm going to have to move some of these, move the videos. What is a sort of newer practice that I've got some slides to follow up, but the actual visual layouts of our materials that we give to students, not only the colors, but the styles and the layout will perhaps make the knowledge easier to understand, make the information clearer. So here's a visual example from this Womack article from 2017. This is a common version of a syllabus or a writing assignment that we might see here. And so Womack wanted us to pay attention to, I don't know if you can see my mouse, probably not, wanted us to pay attention to how compressed the information was and maybe difficult to organize for some learners. And an alternative example we can see here, a bit more visual clarity, maybe a bit more navigable in terms of structure. And Womack encourages instructors to think about how we can visually represent clearer, more navigable texts for students to help ensure that they can follow along. I think this is probably extra important if we're teaching online and this is going to be on a screen and maybe students aren't printing out and making notes on a syllabus or an assignment sheet or something like that. I think that the teaching of writing should also be reflective. Reflection is a core component of my classroom pedagogy and my writing center pedagogy, and whenever I am meeting and working with writers of all levels. I think that reflection should be built in throughout any course on writing, but probably any course in general, as it's fundamental to making knowledge. I encourage students in my class to deliver what I call writer's letters. After they submit their essay, they write a letter about how they produced it and what they think about it. This is often a larger component of the score I give to student writers. How well have you described and discussed and reflected on your text will be a big component of their score rather than the actual product of the essay. I encourage students to experiment with free writing. Just writing for an amount of time without stopping can sometimes liberate ideas, but it doesn't work for everyone. And this reflection is crucial for metacognition, this learning concept of being able to think about how you're learning, how it's going, and checking in with yourself. That theme will come up again a bit later. One piece that I always use at the beginning of a course is this Micro's piece from 1980, where he discusses writer's block. In this study, he interviewed students in the university and asked them about their experiences with writer's block. And he separates into two groups. There are the blockers, who often have trouble getting their ideas onto the page and struggle with this. And then there are non-blockers. And in his discussion, he realizes that the students who are blocked often have very rigid, fixed, hard rules about what writing should be. And if it's not like that on the page, they cannot continue. The non-blockers who never have this problem have very flexible ideas about genre, about voice. They think I can get it down and then fix it later, and they don't need everything to be completely perfect all the time. And this allows students to begin reflecting on their own experiences and their own rules that they work by. I call this for students the internal editor. Free writing is a good way to meet your internal editor. If you're typing in free writing, you are going to make a lot of mistakes in spelling and in grammar, and you will be very tempted to return and get rid of those squiggles underneath the words. Those who are blockers are probably unable to continue until they fix these errors or leave the document as messy. But people who are more comfortable with a messy text can maybe have more success in these regards. It's a good way to check in and reflect on your internal editor and if it's helping or maybe slowing down your work. Another busy slide, but assessment and grading. Very complicated topic. These are very initial concepts. It's really not new for us to make grammar policing a very small portion of a score and to offer formative feedback on the ideas and their development and these chances for reflection. What is a little bit more new is the idea of translingual feedback, which allows students to blend languages, which allows students to kind of like repeat and build on older ideas. And it challenges some of our more conventional notions that there is one perfect grammatically native way to write, and to allow for more variety and remixing of language. What is even newer, there's a book by a writer, Asao Inoue, about labor-based grading contracts, which tries to shift the conversation into the amount of time and work that you're putting in rather than the grammatical perfect quality of the text. These send very different messages for very different kinds of students. This is an example of the language of a labor-based contract for students. That means you are not exactly giving grades on each assignment, but you are telling them to do a certain set of tasks to get a certain score. I think that writing is collaborative, and learning to write should also be. Again, what is not new is this, and what is actually very normal here is to have peer response and group work built into the course. This has made its way into courses outside of English and outside of writing, sociology, the humanities, history. Many times now, these include elements of peer response, which means you can look at each other's work and offer your own feedback on it. What is somewhat new, an article written by one of my colleagues at Miami University, who now teaches in Thailand, the idea of collaborative rubrics. So actually having students work together to build the rubric which they will be graded on. A benefit here is students are developing the language themselves on how they want to talk about the writing. And you can have them discuss how many percentage points should the grammar or the voice or the citations or this be, and they have more agency to discuss this. It has been my experience that students are very good at knowing what grade the work deserves. It is very easy to hear from them how many words they need to talk about a topic fully. It's very easy to hear how they would rank each other's work and what they see as strong. And I've had a lot of success with this effort. It requires some planning, but it can be very productive. What is somewhat new and I think more successful during the pandemic and more online work is taking collaborative writing and shifting it to also collaborative reading, which we know is a part of the writing process. So with perusal, which you can see here, if you're not familiar, an instructor can upload a text that the students will read. Students can then ask questions and reply to the comments. And different from, let's say, Google Drive, perusal keeps track of the amount of time students spend on the text, keeps track of the number of questions they ask, keeps track of the number of questions they reply to. And there's a way to have a dialogue about the reading portion so students can asynchronously collaborate at different times on the reading before they arrive in class so that they can make sure that they bring up questions and concerns together and then have a more productive discussion when you meet at the same time. I think asynchronous collaborative reading is a very helpful tool for all disciplines, but especially in writing when you're trying to ask them to read as writers, something I'll talk about a little bit later. I think that this is sort of the last stage here before we pivot to part two. Multimodality. It's not really new to be assigning non-alphabetic text to have students responding to pictures or paintings, right? If you're learning different ideas, you can look at literature, you can look at historical paintings, all these kinds of things. What is somewhat new is this concept of writing workflows. This is an example of what a student submitted for a workflows assignment where I asked students to make visible the ways they keep track of their time, the ways that they take notes, and to upload pictures and screenshots and artifacts for how they do that. This one was a student who was very shy, who spoke English as a second language. If you can tell in the language there, she spoke Korean as her first language. When we made visible this aspect of the writing process, her peers gave her so much praise. They said, "This is beautiful. It's so organized and structured. I love the colors. How did you do this?" And it brought her some more confidence in these aspects that were otherwise invisible as part of a successful practice to build on. So here are some of the practices as an instructor that I have been able to implement with success. A revise and resubmit policy, where if a student is willing to continue working on a paper after the deadline, I will continue to update their grade. This emphasizes the importance of the process if they are willing to give more time. And I can tell you what the policy looks like for that. I have created podcast episodes to follow up on the material of a lecture. It can be very easy when you learn the system, but you can just offer an audio overview of something you've discussed or something you forgot to mention in the class, 5 or 10 minutes, send it out to students. I've requested student feedback on assignment prompts as I'm making them. So I will just post the document on Google and say, ask me if you have any questions before this is finalized. Is this word count okay? How's this deadline? Do you want to submit it here or here? Do you understand the concept? And students can then give feedback before you finalize it to make sure it's all clear. I have assigned for students to make study playlists as a, so I say, give me 5 songs that you like to study to, or give me 5 songs on a theme, your top 5 playlist. And then I ask them to write a description. Why did you choose this song? I've asked them to give me songs in multiple languages to stretch their kind of like listening ideas. And then I can tell them, oh, like, what does this look like? You have just made an annotated bibliography. You have just made a lit review because you have curated a list of concepts. You've given a discussion of how they are related. You've described why you've chosen them. And this can be a more accessible, multimodal, student-centered practice that helps teach the move of a lit review, but not necessarily reproducing one from an article, let's say. I have also had students as their final product give me a reflection on their workflows. Again, we're going to talk about that later, but instead of having them write a final piece that's like the best work they can produce, I want them to have the largest reflection on what they've learned instead. Before this slide, I'm going to pause. That's a lot of speaking at you. Make some space to look in the chat here and see if there are any questions that have come up. If anyone has anything they want to interject or share, just a space to breathe with all of that information. That was the quick tour.
Anyone? ¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta al momento sobre lo que ha comentado Joe?
Well, yes, I would like to know,
Okay.
maybe you can explain to us a little bit more about requesting students' feedback on assignment prompts. I mean, I don't understand that very well. So you give them a prompt, something to write about, and you ask them if they did understand it or not, or what? What exactly?
Yes. So in my classes, we have larger assignment deadlines. So for example, I want a final draft of a 5-page essay, and it will be due on this day, in a month. As I am making the assignment sheet for what I am expecting in the draft, when it is due, and the specific word count, how many sources should you cite, that kind of thing, I post a draft of this assignment prompt online 1 week before I distribute it as official. And that means students can then go, I don't know what this means. I don't know what you mean here. You spelled this wrong. The link is broken. This is not enough words, etc. And then with that feedback, I finalize the prompt.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Joseph.
Yeah, very good question.
Thank you.
I have another question also.
Yeah.
Could you explain a little bit more about, you were talking about collaborative reading, and it was not clear to me whether the students also have to do something like a rubric to evaluate or assess themselves about reading. How is that?
Well, I've never used a rubric to assess their reading. As an instructor, Perusal has tools where you can keep track of how many comments and who is participating and who is asking questions and how much time they are spending with it. I don't need all of those tools. I don't need to know how long a student spends with the text, but it is easier for me to, for example, if I assign students, I want you to make 2 comments on this text, either asking a question or responding to someone. It's a very easy way to make this the requirement. So the participation grade for my course is I want you to post 2 or 3 comments on this text. And so now I can grade that instead of grading the quality of their writing response alone.
Okay, so it's something like more about comprehension, right?
Yeah, and like participation, like you cannot really ask a question about the text if you haven't engaged it in some way. And it promotes students discussing, especially if they're not meeting in person, they can have a conversation about the text asynchronously rather than online when people can be more nervous, the internet can cut out, the schedules can be difficult. This just allows more flexibility. They can go like post a question and then come back a day later and see if anyone replied.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody wants to ask something else?
Rosendo?
Yes, thank you very much. Nice to meet you, Joseph.
Yes.
I have a question related about metacognition. I mean, you mentioned that some of the students have that kind of internal editor. And then what do you do, or what is the process that you follow in the moment when one of the students or many of the students do not have this kind of mental or internal editor in order to correct their own writing? Thank you.
Yeah, I think as I understand your question, you mean, let's say that the sort of grammatical rules are not very stable as part of the editing.
Well, I mean, sorry, I mean, not only about grammar, but you commented also about the layout, also talking about how to start writing every kind of paragraph and then the connection between one and the other. But not only about grammar, because sometimes some of them make it like conscious or unconscious, like talking about the grammar, but sometimes it's much more about the layout than the grammar, no? Well, depends on the text or the genre that you commented also.
Yes. So I think in my experience so far, all of the students that I've done this kind of activity with have some kind of guiding experiences that have like taught them various rules that they follow. And those are not going to be the same for all students. The free writing example is one way to get them to understand and think about what they wanted to correct and how comfortable they are with various errors being on the page. I think that students also have a sense of what counts as academic writing and what does not. There can be different answers to this, but that's one aspect where you can go, okay, like, well, what would you not say in an essay and why? Like, probably students know to use one language, either one or the other, for example. They probably know not to use curse words, for example. Or maybe they don't have that rule, but it's still like a concept that you can bring into discussion. And I think that part of working with younger writers is you can also begin to have them develop their own rules and how they see things if they are absent. So you can bring up a discussion of a text and what is happening in the writing. I find that a lot of students are trained to pull out the main idea and to find the concept. But if you begin asking questions like, okay, like, why is this quote well integrated? How are these transitions? What makes you think that this is formal or informal? Why do you think it's too long? That can help develop the way to articulate the assessment practices, the ways they make sense of a text, and the writing choices. This quote was too long, this quote was too short, this paragraph's too long, this sentence is too short. That can begin having conversations about the writing that are often implicit and not articulated. Is that helping to answer your question?
Yes, for sure. But I mean, like, also, do you think that the models, the model text, and also the rubrics can help to wake up this internal editor in the students?
I think, yes. I think if you ask students, for example, what grade would you give this? Write me a paragraph on why you would give it that grade. It forces them to begin thinking about writing differently because they've often only thought about it from the student perspective and kind of like hoping they're doing it right. But just asking them to shift in how they view it and go, okay, give this a grade now and tell me why it has that grade, then they can make that shift. And at that point, in my experience, all that's lacking is vocabulary often. So you go, okay, what does this word mean? Let me supply you with this word. Let's talk about quote. Let's talk about voice. Let's talk about diction and word choice. Let's talk about style. And you can begin to offer the vocabulary to articulate the ideas. That's been what I've done in the past.
Yes, thank you very much, Joseph.
Yeah, great question. Another hand.
Thank you very much, Joe. There is a question by Ana Maria Martinez, la maestra Ana Maria Martinez.
Yeah. Maybe this is the last one and then we'll keep moving and have more time at the end.
Okay. She's asking, is this idea of the student's editor related to Krashen's monitor?
Whose monitor?
Krashen.
I don't think I know that scholar.
Okay.
I'm happy to hear briefly. Maybe this is something that I should know.
Yeah, well, Krashen is a scholar that is in the field of second language acquisition, but maybe Ana Maria can share a little bit more about this monitor, because Krashen, as far as I remember, it classifies the learning in different stages, and one of those is monitor. So Ana Maria, could you share a little bit more about this, please?
Well, yes. The thing is that it came up to my mind. I mean, I don't know if it's related or not, but Krashen has this theory that students have a monitor. And sometimes when the monitor is very, very high, the students cannot speak because they are thinking about the errors they are going to make, or if they are going to pronounce incorrectly. So this monitor, when the monitor is really high, the students cannot speak. They feel shy. They feel small, you know. And that is why I was thinking about it. Maybe when you have this editor and it is very, very well developed, you cannot write a word because you're thinking of the errors, the syntax, the vocabulary, the genre, etc. So I mean, I just was asking if it's related or not. That's why. Maybe in a way.
I think these are very resonant concepts. It sounds perfectly aligned. I was when I met Graciela in the UK when we were both there, and I was very surprised to learn in the UK there's a very high number of students who stammer or stutter. And this is partly attributed to the ways that they are taught and how strict the punishments can be socially and pedagogically for getting something wrong. And this kind of like social anxiety influences speaking patterns in the entire country in many ways. So I think that when we begin looking at all these influences, and I think that the monitor, I think the internal editor, these are all coming from a place that is telling you no.
You can do it.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joseph.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
There was another hand. I'm sorry we didn't have time, and I couldn't see your name on the screen. But hopefully we can get to your question, or feel free to ask it later or in the chat. So these practices for me speak to some core commitments that I have on the next slide. Quote unquote bad writers are novice writers. They are not stupid. I think that we would never assume that a student learning to play guitar who was new at it was stupid if they played something badly. But yet, as writers, I remember internalizing bad scores as meaning that I didn't know enough, wasn't smart enough, and that association can be very dangerous and toxic. I think it is important to emphasize the idea of work and practice instead of letting these assumptions that can take over if we don't correct them become internalized by students. I think before we worry about the knowledge, we should address bad writing by first looking at student habits and assumptions. And I think that this goes beyond students. If we're thinking about how we respond to reviewers, even as scholars with big degrees, we can still internalize and become emotional and frustrated and angry. And if we can, in our minds, make that switch that says like, okay, let me figure out how to practice some other writing ideas rather than they don't like it, this is a bad article, it can also help us too. And I think it's very important to remember that both bad and good writing are constructed partially by those who write the text, but also by those who assess it. This is a collaborative social construct that is very important to keep in mind. People are agreeing that something is wrong. It doesn't mean that it is wrong in some empirical sense, let's say. This to me is very valuable and shapes in a fundamental way how I come to my work. I got to the questions early, but now we're going to pivot to this workflow concept. Is everyone's connection okay? Is the time okay? Is the pace with which I'm speaking easy to follow? Are we doing all right? Good.
Okay, everybody is okay with the speed of the talk. ¿Está claro cómo está hablando el ponente? ¿Está entendible? ¿Están de acuerdo con el tiempo en cómo vamos?
Very
¿Me
good.
escucharon? Oh, yes, I think they are okay. Yeah, they say yes on the chat. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
Thank
Thank you. So what I'm going to talk about next is based on a book that has recently come out, I think in the last year, and I think it was very well timed with the pandemic. So my field of composition and rhetoric, probably our main and perhaps only real contribution to education is what we call process theory. It's the underlying theory that informs all I've talked about so far, and it basically articulates a shift from the product-oriented way of looking at writing instruction. Give me a good essay, I'll tell you why it's bad, and we'll move on, to process-oriented. How can we look more at how we make a text rather than just the end point if we want to intervene? Workflow says, okay, we talk about process. Let's move this even further and begin asking even more specific questions about how things are produced, with the knowledge that there are digital and analog tools working together, and we need to be articulating even more specifically how that happens. It's Tim Lockridge and Derek Van Ittersum, who are digital writing scholars. This text is free on the internet for anyone to download, and I think it's great. We're going to briefly discuss it and then talk about some pedagogical ways to implement this. And this goes for us as teachers, but also us as writers, and I'll show you why in the last section. So, according to Lockridge and Van Ittersum, we use workflows as a lens to examine the often omitted tools, material conditions, and activities of writing. If you're not in the composition and rhetoric discourse, you might not recognize that these terms, tools, material conditions, and activities are terms that have been growing in the theory and discourse of the field. They're key terms that a lot of discussion has been around, and they unite these theoretical ideas around a very practical point, which is why I really like it. So they say that a workflow-minded writer would develop, share, and teach their workflows. This term workflow for them is about all of the things we do to accomplish a writing task, and they think very broadly. So we might think our writing is when we sit down and put words on the screen, but they would say, well, it's also how we read. So a tool like Perusal, where we're reading together, can impact our workflow, let's say. It's also how we take notes. It's how we transcribe our quotes. It's who we talk to when we are stuck in various ideas. It's how we wake up in the middle of the night and take a voice note on our phone. It's how we have an idea in the car and what we do with it. It's how we decide we're going to do dishes and clean. It's how, as we want to think through a concept, or when we want to write in the morning or the evening, or how we do that. And they want us to take a very inclusive view of our writing process and look at how effective it is for us. They study the workflow of others, hoping to learn about new software or approaches to minimizing what they call the pain points in the process. Workflow-minded writers see their workflows as a way of finishing tasks and imagining how computing tools might augment and creatively transform their day-to-day work. They don't want us to reject notebooks, but they want us to be aware of how they are connected with the digital tools we are using. More to come. So I have here, and if we are lucky, it will play. I did a screen recording of my own workflow as I tried to prepare for various writing tasks. So I'm going to play it. I'm not going to full screen it, which makes Zoom go nuts. So this is the library website for my PhD institution. If I find a text I know I want to have a little archive of, I first copy the citation. I use the program Scrivener on my computer because you can have a large archive of texts. I create a new document in Scrivener. I put it in the folder it needs to go. I paste the citation so I have it later. And then I switch over. These are keyboard shortcuts that make things more efficient to switch to a different program. I usually read in preview. I make sure that the text has had optical character recognition so that I can highlight and copy and paste. And then as I'm reading, I'm looking for what I think will be a key quote. I'll highlight it, I'll switch apps, I'll paste it as a quote, and I'll put in the page number. I'll then return to the text. Oh yeah, gotta have your page numbers. Saves you so much time later. And then I highlight this as a visual reminder that I've read it and that this was something useful to me. I will then keep reading. I can also make use of other colors. So I use an alternate color if it's just a phrase or a concept that I think is important, but I won't be transcribing it as a quote. I keep reading, and I don't usually read this fast, but the video can't be 10 minutes long. And again, highlighting some phrases and trying to find, in my mind, what jumps out as me as potentially crucial to quote. What I will inevitably do in my summary of it is curate the best quotes. So I'm giving myself options to choose from later. So I think we're speeding up the process here, but if I know that an article is really good, if it's really relevant and likely to make the cut for my final draft, I will then give my impressions of it. I'll begin drafting my summary of it. In this article, this writer argues, describes, discusses. Once I get an idea of what I'm going to want to talk about, I begin drafting that. Sometimes in the middle of reading, sometimes at the end, because this process can be like, I want this idea for sure. Let's start writing it. And I want these annotations to be part of keeping track of ideas before they disappear. So that's a visual, multimodal example of what they mean when they talk about a workflow. And I think it's very likely that for you all, like me, this was not a level of detail that I asked of students. This was not something that I shared or yet something that we did to represent our processes, but it can be very helpful. Oh, it always does this, tries to play again. Another example I can share with you, how did I make this presentation? I had some slides previously and I organized those. I had a note on Google Drive where I put ideas. I had a note on my phone. I did voice memos this morning in the car to refine the ideas while I was driving. Don't tell the police, but I could say in there, this is an idea. I organized an outline on my notebook. And I used all of these tools in my own way to accomplish this task. Being cognizant of, articulating how we're actually doing this work makes it visible so that we can begin to critique what they call pain points. And that critique can be, oh, I keep doing my work at night, but I work best in the morning. I keep having like this annoying thing happen where I'm trying to copy and paste quotes and I get frustrated and lose my track of thought, right? We can begin to have these conversations so that we can work better to write better. And it's at this point that I think we can get into workflow groups for maybe 10 minutes. And I think in this, if people agree, my idea is, and feel free to translate some of these directions, just to have a discussion and start sharing some of these specifics out loud and just practice it and hear what it sounds like to say them, to hear about other people's and begin that conversation as an example. Randomly assigned groups of maybe 6 or 7 people. How many total people do we have? I think 25. So we would need 5 rooms.
Yeah, 5.
And I can do that on my end, or you can do it, Graciela, whatever. I'm used to assigning group out rooms now. I've had some practice.
You can do it, please.
Okay, great. And it sounds like everyone's okay with this. You'll be like pushed into the room and then you'll be zipped back at the end and there'll be a timer telling you. And Graciela, one note, wherever you go is where the recording goes, if you are the one recording.
Oh, okay. Okay. Is it clear what we have to do or what we should do?
While I get this set up, please explain.
¿Está claro lo que vamos a hacer? Yes? Yeah. Yeah, they say yes. Okay, please go ahead with the breakout rooms, please.
Yeah, we'll do 10 minutes. Notify me. And I think everyone except the hosts will be sent to a room and then we get to pick because we have all the power. And there will be a brief countdown before we come back. Here we go.
Yeah.
cloudy. You
I
see
can notice it's really
the
cloudy.
gardeners have been working very hard. So
Hello? Hello, are you there?
Nice to meet you, Maria Consuelo. Maria Teresa, nice to meet you. My name is Ibel de Rosa. Also, Graciela is here.
Oh, yeah.
Recording
Hi.
in progress.
where are you?
Hello.
Where are you?
Cognitive and cognitive strategies can help us. Strategy instruction is very important. I'm from Veracruz.
Oh, excellent. So,
Oh, great.
Maria, Yvette?
So yes, I'm excited to be here. So do anyone want to share about how do you do with your writing flow? Or
Yeah, so who would like to start? Yvette, could you tell us?
Recording stopped.
yes, I can start. That there's no problem. Well, for me, I have been reading a lot about writing, academic writing, moreover argumentative essay in high school students, and I have been trying to develop a way to learn. So I have learned from this that metacognitive and cognitive strategies can help us. Strategy instruction is very important, and moreover writing structure to develop writing skills. So what Joseph was mentioning about thinking out loud is also a metacognitive strategy. It's kind of difficult to talk if you have your microphone on, Maria Teresa. Okay, very good. So yes, so as for me, I think what has worked is to have this strategy instruction to develop writing skills, metacognitive and cognitive strategies for sure, as they are high order skill for writing. And I don't know, I think also using effective strategies could work for students. Like motivation sometimes it's not good enough. I think like if we allow them to they learn also by themselves, giving them like good strategies to develop writing, that will be for me. And that's what I have done with myself. I try to develop a strategy that works. Also, genre-based approach has helped me to know the structure of a writing, to do something about it. I don't know if someone else wants to say something. I think I'm talking a lot. No, no one?
Yes. Hi, Yvette. I'm from Veracruz too.
Hi, Bemo.
Hi, nice to meet you. Well, I don't teach face-to-face students anymore, but I work in a self-access center. So I have to do some kind of guided writing because since they just go for advising, yes, it's a lot harder
Yes.
to model or to teach them how to do this writing. However, I normally, how do you say, count on with the textbook that sometimes has models. So, and I just ask them just to follow a model, not obviously, I normally ask them to consider their own background, yes, and their own context, because it's a little quite different from the context that they have as an example in the book, no?
Yeah.
So I tell them, but still sometimes they have run out sentences, they don't use connectors. So it's harder because they just go for advice. They are not being taught like every day, you know? So it's harder for me. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I think what you do is amazing because you're making like a guide so they can follow. I don't know if you have read before about the genre-based approach.
The what? Sorry?
Genre?
Yeah.
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Can you?
This is a way that they put an example of a text and they show the parts of the text. So students can identify each part and as humans, we all learn like by examples, by like
Imitations.
yes, imitation, mimicking what we do. That could help for you. Maybe if you set like an example of whatever they want you to write, as you mentioned, a guide, and show them the parts that they have to check on. Maybe you cannot teach them all the connectors, right? But you can highlight some and tell them, okay, so in English it's like very important to add connectors, and you need to find one depending. Maybe what you can help is like divided in types, like cause and effect, like adding, or that only, and it's going to be on their own because it's not only you teaching them how to write, evidently.
So you told me that is the genre what?
Genre-based approach.
Yeah, genre approach. Yes.
Genre approach. I'm going to write it down.
Actually,
I'm going to look something
there is a book that is from Highland. It's second language genre-based approach for writing, because Highland is the best like for writing.
Maybe you can share that on the chat so that they know.
Exactly. So
I
that
don't,
Maria,
yeah, of course.
Gonzalo, would you like to share something, please?
Well, yes, regarding our workflow, well, the best thing I can suggest is the use of rubrics. With rubrics, students know what you can expect from their writings, and they can be sure that they included an introductory paragraph. They presented some main ideas. They gave a conclusion. They include references. Even those basic details sometimes are important because they tend to forget that. I work with university students, and it's not easy. Sometimes we have different criteria as teachers, but with a rubric, they are sure about what they are doing. They feel more confident about their writing production.
Consuelo, I have a question. When you mentioned rubric, what has worked for you? Do you use an analytical rubric or a holistic rubric?
Well, what I try to do is like the general structure of the text. I don't use that division of analytical or holistic, but I try to emphasize the structure of the text we want to produce. So it's basically about the general point of view of the text, of essay or review.
Yeah, I think it's more analytic because you are focused on the structure, the specific sections, and how you want to achieve them. And the holistic is when we see the text and we just look at it and we say, oh, probably this is a good text, because you can see immediately that there are some paragraphs or that there are some topic sentences in some of the paragraphs. But it's like a general, having the big picture just in a more subjective way. And the rubric that you are telling us is more analytic. You are focusing on specific aspects that they should cover in the writing. So it's also a good, but from my opinion, we need to combine, mix or balance the two, so that we also, the students are aware that it's not just the product or the grammar or the language, but also the other aspects, what is inside of the text, or why they are writing what they are writing, or how they wrote what they wrote. So any other comment, Maria Teresa, that you would like to share?
Well, I teach learning disabilities, and one of the subject is read and write, of course. And maybe it is different from you because they have to experiment the activities and then write about them to program, in order to program to the persons who are going to apply them. So I think it's very different from you.
what I can.
Try Spanish. I understand sometimes.
Okay. So, bueno, coincidimos, voy a ver tantito de español. Coincidimos, no, mejor voy a practicar mi inglés. Vamos a esforzar. Yeah, we have a very common practices. We use Mendeley, for example, and other reference administrators. Well, I have a tip from a partner. She used Excel for write, for example, some words or some ideas, important ideas to use in the new writing, and that's a good tip. But you have very variety of tools. We don't use it. We will like it, but the fact is that we don't use it, and it will be very, I think, very helpful for us.
Good. I think you articulated that brilliantly. So don't be shy about your English. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I have a question about, you mentioned that you use Scrivener.
Yeah.
Is that free or we have to pay for the use of it?
That costs, it's individual licenses. They offer discounts for instructors, but it's a lifetime license. And I don't remember what the cost was. I did it when I started graduate school. We say I ate the cost, which means like I just was like, I need to do it. And I think it was $50 or something like that. You can go like if you're on a Mac, it's on like the App Store. But if you go to their website and just say like, hey, I'm a teacher, or hey, I'm a grad student, like what discounts do you have? They bring it down. There are others. This is the one I like because you can set it so that your screen is just your writing and like other notifications don't happen. They call it typewriter mode, and it scrolls the page. So you don't have to like make more space. And also because I keep an archive of all the articles, like for my dissertation, alphabetized as separate documents that I can go back into. And this archive to me is everything. And so I paid the dough. Graciela.
Yeah, is there any comment over there, please? Thank you very much.
We can get back to the rest of the presentation if folks don't mind. I'll share my screen once more. And it looks like the recording has continued.
Yeah.
Yep. And everyone can see this. If you can't, scream or give a comment or something. So this was what we did. Thank you for sharing. Hopefully it was productive to begin having these conversations. And I wonder, we can also think reflectively, how can we make space for more conversations about workflows with students, with one another? How can we bring this sort of focus to conversations when we think about writing? Can be, I think, very helpful when we think about our goals and getting published. Not just talking about, like the responses or something, but sharing these ideas, we can begin to collaboratively have these kinds of insights. If you're working with tutors in a writing center context, have them read writing workflows, have them create their own screen recordings of their workflows to share and critique. And then you can workshop ways to bring these questions into a conversation with the writer. You can workshop, how would I phrase a question? How would I bring this up? How would I ask them to think more specifically about what they're doing? And in working with all writers, you can ask questions about what programs do you use? Do you use keyboard shortcuts? What's your workspace look like? Where do you write? When do you write? What do you eat beforehand? These all are part of a workflow. You can encourage reflection, and then you can start sharing resources to help demonstrate these different workflows and try new apps, try new notebooks, try new ways to keep organized, however you like. Just bring it into the conversation. So we're getting to Act 3. Hopefully we've kept everyone's attention. These are just some of my brief thoughts about publication. Spoiler alert, Graciela shared with me some questions just so I understood where folks were at with their writing. And when I was thinking about the answers to these questions, I wanted to have this sort of conceptual foundation before getting to them. And seeing writing in a particular way, a lot of these questions were specific, like the end points of publication. And to answer how you fix this particular text, to me, is less valuable than how you can think broadly about the task of publication and what that work looks like, which is why we've done all of this kind of background work. So, a publication workflow. I've used this phrase to read as a writer. I think this is not so easy to do. This is my field. And so the terms and the ways we think and write about this circulate all over. But as you're reading articles and maybe taking notes of the ideas, try thinking about noting the writing moves that jump out at you. This text in this journal, they're doing this really great job of having long introductions and discussions about the literature, or maybe they get right to the point, or maybe the structure is a certain way. Even small insights recorded can help build up a repertoire of places that are style related to how you want to write. So read for content and the form when you're making notes. When I write a summary now, I don't do it as much, but I used to go like, oh, this journal lets people use personal narrative a lot more than others, or this journal is very formal and all the articles follow this kind of thing, and they're all citing 30 articles, and this other journal, they only cite 5 or 10. This other journal seems more aimed at quantitative, lots more diagrams. This journal is not. And so you can keep track of that and how you keep track of your articles, these journal and editors' styles. And then I think we should share our impressions with our colleagues. So when we're talking about articles, we can just remember to bring up 1 or 2 things about the writing itself, just to share. If we collaborate, we can build more knowledge much more quickly. If you think I need to read everything and understand all the rhetorical moves of all the journals, it's a very daunting task. But if you realize that the people around you have also been reading tons of articles and have their own insights, and once you begin to share them, like, oh, you write it kind of this style, maybe this journal, or I read this article and it kind of fits. Adding these points can help us have more focus on what we write and where we send things. And keep these organized in whatever way works best for you. Notebooks, binders, digitally, audio archives, whatever. I've broken down how I approach publication and whether or not an idea is ready for that stage. This is a very busy slide. We might have more follow-ups with it, but I want to make sure that the article I have in mind, I can say its contribution in one clear sentence. Sometimes that's everyone in the field is saying this, and I am adding this. Or maybe it's this is the gap, and this is how I'm filling it. And if I don't have that sentence, I know I need to keep working to get there and make sure that all the ideas are leading to that clear point. If it's too complex, I keep refining, because if you don't have that clear answer to guide your writing, to know if this article is relevant or not, if you've given enough background, you will struggle. I think I struggle to have answers to those questions until I really know that thing as my North Star. Then you can ask, what are the most important other texts your article is conversing with? This is, for me, the playlist assignment. You are curating the hits, the best articles that have to do with your text. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 20. If it's 50, refine what your contribution is, because there shouldn't be that many and it won't be the right scope. So I want to make sure that I know the articles I'm in conversation with and who they cited. Lastly, how does this article align with a particular publication's audience and style expectations? Journals post their requirements online, make sure that the citation style and their comments on voice resonate with your article first. Then I ask colleagues, especially ones who've been in the game longer, who've been keeping up with the journals for years and years, I ask, okay, do you think this is a good fit? What do you think of the style there? And these can help me make some choices in my text. And the all-important read as a writer, something we can often do implicitly, quickly in our minds, but never make it explicit, how these moves are impacting the way that we engage with the text. For the sake of time, we'll keep moving on that comment. I think that we learn a discipline, we train in a subject area, and we read that scholarship. But I think it's important to recognize that we keep implicit, but it is very true that we are also workflow researchers, which means we should be constantly figuring out the best way for ourselves to work. And we are also writing researchers. Though we maybe don't have formal training, we are trying to study the writing moves along with the content of the text if we want to publish. To make these roles explicit enables us to begin actually discussing it more clearly, which is what I'm trying to do today. Back chatter. Conclusion number 2, listen to yourself. If you are a workflow researcher, there needs to be a way that you can listen to when you work best, how you work best, what is not working, and how your ideas are taking shape. And listen to each other. There are colleagues and students around you who are all at the same time wrestling with being workflow researchers and writing researchers, even if they're not trained in it. We need to get these ideas together if we're going to try to figure out and make our most efficient work. So a thing I tell writers all the time, there really are no shortcuts to making knowledge. There are no shortcuts to developing an idea, and there are really no shortcuts to doing the work of writing. But we also never really know how long it's going to take. And because time can seem like our enemy, what it really means is we should pivot to making the best use of the time we have, because you can get a lot done if you do a little bit each day. If you're doing it at the right time, with the right focus, and with the right systems, you can really accomplish a lot. Graciela, you are muted.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Joy, for such an enriching talk. I have several questions, but I don't know if we have time. But I first would like to know whether the audience have any other question to ask. At the moment, you are on the right time, so please take advantage and share us with us, please. ¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta, algún comentario que quiera hacer? Okay. No?
In the chat, Ricardo is asking about Scrivener.
Yes.
Yeah, it's answered.
That is
it's answered now. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. There are others as well. That's the one that I use, especially because you don't have a subscription. Now more and more applications require a subscription. Any questions? That was a lot to cover, and we kind of sped through the end, but I hope you understand why I wanted to do that work to set us up to have the discussion. Some of the questions about particulars of publication were shared. I can go through some of those as well. but I want to make a little bit more space if there are kind of like topical questions. If there were terms that I used that were unfamiliar in a context, feel free to speak up out loud in the text or in the chat. I mean, I think that Yvette had a question before, but now Yvette's being a little shy.
I have one question.
Yeah.
I assist to another conference about writing in English, and in that conference, the expositor say us that she used to find the how do you say, revistas indexadas. So I don't know.
Citations?
In the indexing magazines or peer review magazines, yeah. You can speak in Spanish and we can help you if you want to say it in English.
Translate. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sí, ella buscaba revistas prestigiosas para escribir, porque decía que también si escribías en cualquier revista te puede jugar a la contraria, o sea, te puede que, no sé, que te hagas algo así como una mala reputación o algo así. O sea, y tú promueves mucho de escribir, no importa dónde, así es como das a entender o así es como lo entiendo. ¿Qué piensas tú acerca de esto? Gracias.
Okay, Joe, he is asking about the type of magazines that we use to publish, whether it's more important to publish in an international prestigious magazine or in another journal that is less prestigious. Is influencing your reputation as a writer or no? What do you think about that?
Well, I have a lot to say about that, and I will try to keep it brief. In general, I think that I am aware of I think we can call it linguistic hegemony, the ways in which English dominates who is considered relevant as a scholar. I wish that there were local languages represented in academic practice around the world and treated as equal to dominant languages like English or German or French. I think that indigenous languages should be published and treated as equally valid as more formal languages, let's say. And I wait for a time when publications are multilingual. If there's something I can do to contribute to those, I will. My own belief is that these ideas of authority and value and recognition for prestigious journals is in some small measure due to the quality of the work, the quality of the review process, the quality of the ideas that they are offering, and they earned a reputation for being good at this. I think sometimes there is also a component where there are aspects of privilege and linguistic power and abuse and exclusion that is in place. There are fields where you have to pay to get published. There are fields where language practices that fall outside of a very narrow definition of correct are rejected. I think that this holds back in general the way that knowledge is circulated, and I think that it unfairly inhibits scholars in different backgrounds and places. I have what I think some people might call a radical view on that, but I feel very frustrated at the commerce and the commodification of knowledge through publication and the people who are the gatekeepers to access. So I think that if you are pressured to publish in a certain venue and a certain language, there is maybe nothing you can do to change that, and you have to act in an interest that fits you. We cannot forgive students for wanting to publish and giving them the tools to do it. But I think it's important to be critically aware that this is a kind of commodification of knowledge and an exclusive thing. And I also think that there can be ways to talk about it and think about it and work through these challenges and try to find new ways to circulate alternatives that can fill the marketplace with other opportunities. And I support those. If I can support any ideas you have about this, I am here, but that is my own personal stake in that. And until those changes can be made, we can find the places to publish how much we hate that shit. And we can also continue to develop the tools to do the work that we need to take care of ourselves and our communities.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry for a long answer.
No, it was okay.
Rosendo has a question.
Thank you very much. Okay, Joseph, I want to ask you, maybe it could be a very difficult question, but it's like this kind of question that sometimes could it be like make a comparison between this part of Latin America and also the United States? Now, what are the most common errors that you have experienced before you publish a paper?
What were the most common? What? I think you cut out.
Yes. What are the most common problems that you have experienced before publish a paper?
Yes. So for me, I've been very lucky thus far to have, within my discipline of writing studies, I think we have reviewers that are more aware of language and feedback in the process. I hear more horror stories from my colleagues in other fields. There is a universally known reviewer 2. Do you all know about reviewer 2? Reviewer 1 is very nice. Reviewer 1 likes your ideas and welcomes your contribution. And reviewer 2, quite frankly, is an asshole. Reviewer 2 doesn't like anything you have to say. Reviewer 2 thinks you never should have gotten a degree. Reviewer 2 is there to make you cry. I do not like reviewer 2. I think reviewer 2 might be somewhat universal, and hopefully there's only one reviewer 2, but if you have 3 and 4 and 5, bad news. So this is thing 1, and everyone here has reviewer 2, even in my discipline. What I struggle with is when I get competing feedback. I struggle with the idea that they say, add this, add this, add this, and I'm already at the word limit. And I say, okay, if you tell me what to add, then also tell me what to cut, please, so I can make room for it. It is for this reason that I like writing in collaboration, because we can talk to each other about what we might want to do and calm down a little bit about it. But writing collaboratively is not treated as equal contributions to knowledge and furthering our careers, something I vehemently push against. Also, this first writer, second writer, third writer hierarchy, we might as well just put it in smaller fonts is the joke that I want to make, because what are we doing? Anyways, so these challenges for me, I conceptualize as following the idea until the end. That amount of time and commitment is difficult. And I think that it's also about negotiating between audiences and beginning to be confident in pushing back against reviewers. I think I have a privileged position for many reasons. One of them is English is my first language. And if a reviewer wants to challenge me, I feel now very confident in going like, well, I'll change this, but like not that. And if you don't like it, I'll take it somewhere else. And that's a confidence that comes is partly from privilege and partly from irritation, quite frankly. So I feel like I can make those choices from where I'm at. Does that answer your question? Those have been my experiences, but others face significant other barriers for time, attention. I don't have children, another privilege in terms of trying to get work done, you know. So I don't know if that answers your question, Rosendo.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, like we have very good relationship with what we happen with us, no? But here in Latin America, as you mentioned, the big problem is the language, no? Because sometimes our language is Spanish, and sometimes when you try to write into English, so then you have a big problem, because in Spanish we write and write as much as we can, and in English you go straight to the head, no? And so sometimes it's like to pass to one culture to another. Sometimes it's going to be difficult. But thank you very much.
Yeah, and in my dissertation, I would submit chapters to my advisor. The director of my dissertation was Bruce Horner, who is a major name in translingualism and also big on like resisting these monolingual market forces. And even he would go, great, this is a nice chapter, but that thing at the end, it goes at the top every time. So these rhetorical expectations, and every time I hated doing it. I was like, no, this is how I want it to sound. Then I would move it and go like, okay, all right, I guess. So I think you can draw a cultural barrier, but I think even just the ways we think and want to convey an idea doesn't have to be tied to a culture in those ways. And I think that, yeah, I think I'll end there. I could keep going on and on, but I think there are more questions that would be great to share.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. I think we are almost running out of time, so we will ask you the last one that we have here on the chat is by Mayra Elizondo Cortez, sorry. She says, I think that to be a good writer, you must first be a good reader. And maybe that idea is aligned with that. A good way to start writing is to imitate. What do you think about it? What do you think about it?
Yeah. What do you mean by imitate? If you don't mind clarifying, please.
Probably she's trying to say that replicating or doing something similar. Is that okay, Mayra? Is that what you want to say by imitating? Mayra? I don't know.
Well, I can address that question. I think that reading and imitating and writing are kind of two different things, but they are connected. I think that there is no reason to say that a particular exercise is not productive if it helps a writer clarify their thinking.
Yes, sorry.
Yes,
I'm talking about texts that you like. For example, you had read texts that are very interesting and texts that you understand very good. And maybe a good idea could be try to imitate that structure or the phrases that are very, for example, familiar or no more than familiar, something like friendly for you, for the lecture, and you try to imitate, but only in the beginning, because I think that then you can have your own style, for example. But I think that it's very difficult. And of course, we are talking about only academic writing. For example, I think that it's very, very difficult to write about your feelings, for example. For example, I love to write tales. It's good, but in one moment I tried to write some very little tale in English, and it's very, very difficult. And I say, okay, come back only to write academic text for this moment. But okay, this is another topic. Don't worry. Sorry. I only speak about imitate text that you like and you understand, and you have maybe your favorite papers. And I think that it could be a very good idea. Try to imitate that.
Yes, I think you are exactly right. I think here we call this writing moves. These are rhetorical moves or verbal choices. The only thing that I would push back on is I think there's no reason to stop doing that when at any point in your writing development. I think you can always pick up new moves and tools and things that you like. In my dissertation, I offer this very subtle rhetorical move that I call from or to and. Very simple rhetorical move. And I pay attention to how the people that I interviewed would say phrases like on the one hand and on the other hand. And I began to notice how all these texts that I really liked were doing this very simple rhetorical move. I'm learning this at this stage. Why can I not imitate it now? So if you find something that speaks to you in a text, I don't think there's any reason to think that you should stop modeling it, imitating it, taking it on as your own. And in terms of language, there's I think it's Anzaldúa wrote a text. I don't know if this circulates, but it's a Borderlands methodology. And she writes in Spanish and in English and writes about how the very idea of a strong border between them is a fake construction by all these other forces. So why should I be forced into one or the other? She mixes poetry and academic work and all these different genres. And this was a very groundbreaking and effective and well-received text in my field. So I would say imitate what you want. Like repetition, even if you're imitating, is from a different position, a different time, to a different audience. These things change it, even if we feel like it doesn't. So I'm with you 1,000%.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, is this Ricardo's question? That is difficult. I am happy to share some texts that I think are really well articulated, but I also think that it's a very personal choice what resonates with you style-wise. In general, the text that you find easy to follow, that you find has the ideas that resonate with you, is the answer to that question. My lens is going to be what has resonated with me. And I've been in enough seminars to feel like we can read basically the same text, but get a very different experience from the person next to us. I think you have to listen to yourself and see what you think is clear. I'm a big fan of subheadings. I'm a big fan of very clear arguments. And I am a big fan of language that is accessible and not robotic. And the journals that allow you to be a human in the way you write, to tell jokes, to have pictures, to make interesting points, those are the ones that I appreciate most. Other people with other ways of thinking or in other disciplines, they want different things from a text. They want it to speak to different aspects and elements. And so maybe a more strict, formula-driven, well-structured medical text, engineering text, is simple and efficient and effective for them because time is a big constraint and they just need to get certain pieces of info. So for these, I think they're very different requirements.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. So we will proceed now to deliver you one virtual certificate for your participation. And let me share the screen, please.
Do you have access?
I think so. It's taking some time.
These things take time.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your availability, Joe, for sharing this enriching talk to all of us. We have learned a lot, and there are a lot of things that we have to think about it and try to be more constant and also try to practice. As you said, that writing is something that we need to practice. a lot. So the screen, I think, is now there. Yeah, okay. So, can you see the screen? Yeah, right?
You can see the screen. It's a little bit frozen. I mean, while we wait, I thought I might address some of those questions just as a general, the questions that you shared with me while we're waiting for this. I mean, we have a bit of time. The questions came through and I highlighted some of the comments. Questions where there are biases in the style and the phrasings, where tables don't look right, where things need to be more focused. I think that there's probably a chance that you're getting feedback that the sentences might be too long or the ideas are complex. A lot of reviewers want things to be very formulaic, which again can be a cultural thing. It can also be part of that publication. It can be part of a discipline. It can be that individual. When I get feedback like this, I let it rest. I need to read it and then take a day. And the term focused can have very specific writing things you address. Topic sentences, very big deal for publication. Make sure that your paragraph describes what it's about. Subject headings can help keep things structured. So you can make an outline and make sure that what you've written follows a structure. You can make sure that the point, your main argument is not at the end, but up at the top. So maybe you write your draft and then you go, oh, this thing at the end, you just move that right to the top and then reconfigure as needed. And sentence length in general, if you find that your readers, your reviewers are telling you like, I got lost here, that is amazing feedback. That is super helpful because they're not saying your ideas are bad. They're just saying like, help me make this clearer. Look here. So in that case, I will try to break up long sentences into smaller ones. I will try to make sure there's a topic sentence telling people what is going to be in that paragraph or even in that section. And then I will go through and I will cut out what I don't need. And you can be scrupulous. Like you have an older version, if you need it back, make cuts, make cuts and re-clarify these points. So there are writing things in place. But if the idea itself, again, is not that simple sentence where you know what's relevant and what's not, you kind of have to circle back and refine the idea even further, perhaps, which is a longer process. But in terms of the writing, read aloud and record yourself and listen to it. Ask people to read sections of it and have them look at very specific things. But probably the most important word level thing that helps your writing is to improve the clarity of your verbs and get rid of adjectives and adverbs you don't need. Action verbs like argues, describes, discusses, clarifies, refutes are much better than is, was, were, be, been, being verbs. So this writer conflates, confuses, articulates, gestures towards, and then pay attention to your rhetorical phrasing. Those kinds of changes, just go to a paragraph, underline the verbs, find synonyms that are more clear, will make your writing seem so much more focused and to the point if you pick clear verbs.
Excellent.
End of.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think that we can proceed because time is almost.
Lenita, if you want, I can share the constants.
Okay, thank you very much, Mari Carmen. I will now start. Ok. UNAM FES Acatlán, División de Matemáticas e Ingeniería, a través del proyecto de GAPA PAPIME PE 301521, la cátedra digital, tiene el honor de entregar al doctor Joseph B. Franklin por haber este certificado virtual por su valiosa participación en el Seminario de Investigación Digital número 16, Academic Writing in English Online Support for Publication Purposes. Por mi raza hablará el espíritu. Santa Cruz, Acatlán, Naucalpan, a 3 de septiembre del 2021, firman la actuaria Luz María Lavín Alanís, jefa de la división, y la doctora María del Carmen González-Videgaray, responsable del proyecto PAPIME. Gracias a ella fue posible esta reunión y nos gustaría que le diéramos un aplauso al ponente y a Mari Carmen por todo su apoyo para llevar a cabo esta sesión.
Thank you, thank you.
Gracias a todos.
Gracias.
Esperemos que haya sido de mucho enriquecimiento para compartir con sus alumnos, sus colegas y para ustedes mismos sobre todo también. Si alguien está interesado en tener la grabación, enviamos ahí un link en el chat. Solamente tienen que registrarse ahí y se las compartimos. Igual yo se la voy a pasar a la doctora Mari Carmen y si ella está de acuerdo en compartirla en el canal de donde ella las suele subir, con todo gusto también ella les estará mandando la información. Muchísimas gracias y pues que tengan una bonita tarde. Muchas gracias. Más tarde también te envío, por favor, Joe, later I will send you through the email the virtual certificate for you. Thank you very much. I don't know if you would like to say something else, Mari Carmen or Joe or Luz María.
Thank you very much, Luz María.
Bueno, pues yo en español, Joseph, a ver cuánto me entiendes, pero muchas gracias, Joseph. Muchas gracias por tu participación.
Oh, muchas gracias para ti. Thank you so much. I have the link for the presentation in the chat. And thank you so much for your kind words and your attention. I'm humbled by your time and your attention to these ideas and so grateful for the opportunity to speak.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Luz María.
Muchas gracias. Pues muchas gracias a Joseph. Muchas gracias, como lo comentaba ahorita Graciela. Muchas gracias, Mari Carmen, por esta oportunidad que nos das a todos los profesores de seguirnos capacitando, ¿no? Pues en esto tan importante que ahorita pues ya es lo digital, ¿no? Entonces, la importancia que tiene ahorita este Seminario de Investigación Digital. Muchas gracias por siempre impulsar estas cosas novedosas que nos ocurren, ¿no? A diario en la humanidad. Graciela, excelente tu moderación, muchas gracias. Y de verdad, muchas gracias a todos ustedes porque, bueno, por eso Mari Carmen se siente siempre muy motivada porque hay mucha respuesta de todos los académicos siempre. Muchas gracias, Joseph. Gracias.
Thank you very much to everyone.
Bueno.
Mari Carmen, ¿algo que desees agregar?
No, thank you very much. I'm really happy. And I hope you enjoy the speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Adiós.
Bye, bye.
Gracias. Gracias a todos.
Thank
por su
you.
participación.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye en inglés. ¿Verdad, Eloy? Bye bye en inglés. Adiós, Graciela. Adiós, Joseph.
Adios.
Adiós.
Bye bye, Joe.
Bye bye. You're the file for this is going to be huge from the recording.
Yeah, I imagine, yeah. But okay, I'll see. Okay, I'll keep in touch soon. Thank you very much again. Bye bye.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Bye.